Hello there.
Welcome everyone to the second episode of my All Tanks 0 to Keystone Hero challenge. Now first off, I'd like to thank everyone for the support the first episode has received. I was not quite expecting this, and I'm both grateful as well as humbled by everyone here. So thank you. It's great to have you here. Now before we dive into things, there's a few things I want to talk about. I want to ask you guys a question. Maintaining 5 characters every week is a lot of work, but the real problem comes from the editing required to turn the journeys of 5 characters into one video. Simply put, I've noticed this week that it's impossible for me to give every tank the proper attention they deserve, and in a more general sense, I feel like I'm kind of forced to give a more surface level overview because of this. Now the question, do you guys feel it would be better for me to take it one tank at a time? And once the goal is achieved, I move on to the next one. Personally, I feel like this would allow me to dive deeper into each tank's journey and my own journey when it comes to learning the ins and outs of each class. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. I'll also be putting up a poll in my community tab. If I can link it in the description, I definitely will. Now last episode ended with us opening our first vault for the DH, the Warrior and the Paladin. And this episode, we will mainly focus on the Monk and the Death Knight to catch them up to speed with the rest of them. I will also put out an episode a couple of days after this one, where we also dive into the second week of the other 3 tanks. This is kind of to still give every tank the attention they deserve, but come next week, I will probably, if you guys agree with it, switch to a one tank at a time kind of system, if you will. Now without further ado, let's start with someone who tragically fell behind the rest of the pack, the Monk. So this week is actually also the beginning of a new patch, 10.1.7. This introduces a couple of things of note: the Dream Search world events, and the heroic version of the Dawn of the Infinites mega dungeon, which is also split into 2 parts now. This was actually perfect because both of these things offer a quick way to get some 402 gear to prep for the mythicplus dungeons on the horizon. I still had the heroic weekly quest on this character, so after doing some Dream Surges, which I forgot to record, I decided to queue for the newly released heroic dungeons to get a higher item level reward from them. Now, to my pleasant surprise, I noticed that every boss guarantees you a splintered spark, even if you get something from the loot table. Every boss drops a splintered spark. In other words, I had a quick and easy way to farm sparks, which naturally I did, on both the Monk as well as the DK. I forgot to record these on the DK naturally, sorry, yeah, my bad. In between doing this, I looked into what items I could make, what was the cheapest and the most impactful, and spent some cash to get it done. This made it very easy and quick to gain item level, and due to the recrafting system, I can upgrade these crafted items later, once I have the required items for it. I didn't craft anything in any of the tier P slots, so legs, hands, chest, shoulder and helmet, since I figured it'd be a potential waste until I had my 4 set properly covered. Needless to say, I did the spark farming crafting for all of my other characters as well. After finishing the heroic weekly, I collected my reward, which was a better weapon. Well, kind of. I wasn't too happy with it because I knew that I was gonna craft a second weapon anyway. But hey, you can't win them all. After all of this, I figured it was time for some keys. So let's dive into the first one, which is a +5 underwrought. Yeah, I forgot to record my first run. It was a +2 Uldaman, which we +3'd. Nothing special about it, luckily. But I'm clearly terrible at remembering to press the record button in OBS. It will happen again. Sadly, I can promise you that. Anyway though, +5 underwrought and my first Brewmaster key. Let's go. So the first challenge in underwrought in pugs at least, is not pulling the ticks in the beginning of the dungeon. Sadly, we failed. This made it so that the first pull was a bit more chaotic than I would have wanted and expected, but ultimately we do kind of get through it without all too much of an issue. We didn't experience any kind of problems with the next couple of pulls in the first boss, so we're not going to talk about those. What I do want to point out though is that I've noticed in these pugs, and this is not only on Brewmaster but on pretty much all of the tanks, you don't really get a lot of time to gain aggro on any kind of pack, especially if you want to pull 2 packs together or a couple of mobs you want to add to the pool. Most of the people just see a new pool and they blast their DPS, and if you're running away to get more mobs, you don't have aggro. You're screwed. Yeah, I don't like that. I wish it would have been different in a lot of these instances. Now, we absolutely and utterly destroyed Kragmaw in this dungeon. He didn't even get to cast his first tantrum, but I do want to mention, as kind of a, I guess, a general spoiler, if you will, Kragmaw seems to be kind of a pug killer. That's gonna come back later, you'll see. But this time the key was just too low and the damage of these people was just too high, so we didn't really have any problem with it. Now, the rest of the dungeon went by pretty much without any kind of a problem. There was a funny moment though. At some point we pulled this extra worm and the healer paralyzed it, and then we all kind of just looked at it. I've never been in this situation, so I don't know if the healer can just click the paralyzation buff off of the mob or something, but all of a sudden it was attackable again, and then we were happy. But we kind of just looked at it for a while. It was kind of silly. Actually, editing Choco here, I looked back at the footage and it says in very big blue letters that it is our Shadow Priest's minion, so they mind controlled it. I didn't realize that when I looked at it the first time. But yeah, so the priest mind controlled it, and then he decided to release it, and then we could attack it again. So that's actually what happened. After that little funny moment with the worm, we killed the third boss and the key was done. I didn't loot anything from the chest specifically, but I did get the 2 items from the 2 other guys, which is honestly a massive boost for me, so I'm very happy with that. I also got my next keystone, which is a +8 Brackenhide, so onwards to that one. So for the most part, nothing of note really happened in this run. The priest died all the way in the beginning because he butt pulled one of the hunters that I didn't want to pull. But aside from that, we had 2 disease dispels. We were doing pretty much perfectly for the vast majority of it. One moment that I did kind of feel some frustration was when we pulled those gut stabbers, because people do not know how to hug the right side after this bridge. It is what it is. Aside from that, we pretty much aced this key. Once the key was over and we got our loot, I was once again the lucky one, because I got some really big glove upgrades, going from 376 to 411, and I can also turn this piece into tier, which is amazing. And the key that I got out of it was a +10 Vortex Pinnacle. Now, this Vortex Pinnacle is sadly where things start going south for our monk this week. Everything already starts in the first pull pretty much. Before I'm actually properly in front of the mobs doing my thing, and before I'm able to pull the next 2 Mistrals in the back, the Demon Hunter jumps in front of me and also gets aggro. Luckily, he doesn't die. I don't know how he survived, really, to be honest. It's kind of a mystery to me. But this is the first of many problems that will arise. Now, what follows is me mismanaging my cooldowns a couple of times, and then I end up dying, and then the rest of the group also dies. One of the times that this happened, I also took the wrong tornado portal thingy, so I had to walk the long way back, which meant we lost a lot of time as well. But aside from that, people just died to the basic mechanics of the dungeon a lot, whether it was not standing in the lightning shield, just dodging things on the second boss, for example. At some point we had 2 battle reses available, and the druid just didn't press the rebirth button, so we were in a fight for way longer than we should have been. There was cloud bursts that went off. I could have stopped them, other people could have stopped them, but no one did. I think I was personally too focused on my core rotation to properly pay attention to everything else at all times. That's kind of a beginner thing that I will probably get through once things feel more natural to me. I'm very good at using my utility on my main, but that's because everything else pretty much goes on autopilot, if that makes sense. This is not the case yet with all of these other tanks. But yeah, this key was horribly bricked. Lots of deaths, lots of mistakes, lots of silliness as well. As a result, we have a minute of overtime, which is honestly kind of surprising that it's only a minute, but nevertheless, that's too much. So, no timed key for the first time in this challenge, which is unlucky. Sadly, there's going to be more. There's also going to be keys that are left early, so that's going to happen as well. More on that later. Now, the downgraded key that I got from this is a +9 Uldaman, but I decided to leave it at that for this week for the monk. I felt like the amount of progress that I made coming from the bench to where we are now is already a massive leap forwards. I'm very happy with that. Technically, you could still say that my monk is a bit behind. Not really when it comes to gear though. More on that later. We'll give a proper overview at the end of the video. Mainly when it comes to score and just the amount of keys that I've done or tried. But that's going to be an issue for next week to solve. I'm very excited to play monk. I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed familiarizing myself with it further. It's still the most mysterious tank out of all of them for me so far, but I really like the concept of it, and I think that already is motivating enough for me to keep learning it. So, with all of that said, let's get on to our new tank. The next tank. The other tank that was sat on the bench. Let's look at Blood Death Knight. As mentioned before, I did some Dream Surges and farmed Sparks by doing the heroic version of Dawn of the Infinites to get gear crafted for me. This made it so I reached 409 item level before even stepping foot in any of the M+ dungeons. Also note, during one of my heroic runs, the cheat death trinket actually dropped for me, which is incredibly funny because I wasn't particularly looking for it. But hey, we'll take it. I still have 2 green slots that are desperate to get upgraded, but overall I feel very happy with this massive item level jump. Because of that, I figured I'll just ask this NPC for a mythicplus keystone instead of looking for it in an M0 dungeon first, so we can immediately start our journey. So the key given to me was a +2 freehold, which is a classic of course, and I felt like it was also a very good opportunity for me to see how it would all work out in some bigger pools. Now that said, it's a +2, so didn't really matter whatsoever. We kind of blasted through this key. There was one funny moment though. After the bridge, when you kill the first boss, there's always this question of, ooh, are you going to pull the pack that you don't want to pull? Or are you actually able to successfully skip it? And this one, it looked like it was fine, and then the last person still pulls it, and then it gets a bit chaotic and 3 people die, but ultimately everything is still perfectly okay, and then we just kind of W key through the rest of the dungeon, and it's an easy +3, so very nice. The key that I got from this was a +5 Brackenhide Hollow. Now this key was overall also very smooth. There was a bit of a funny moment with the Demon Hunter on the very first boss. They were the one targeted by the big red arrow, and I had to block it, and he kept moving away from me. I initially thought that the boss went through me and somehow still killed him, but upon looking back at the recording, he was just constantly moving and making it impossible for me to actually block the attack. And then lastly, sadly, the 2 gut stabber stealth mobs also got pulled in this run, so we also lost some time over there, but that is kind of whatever. Now the next key we got was a +7 Uldaman. This key went without any kind of issue. We had one death here and another death there, and they were very inconsequential. I think if the damage of the entire group was a little bit higher, we would have easily +3'd it. Now, because nothing really happens with this key, I will just talk about how I feel about Blood Death Knight for a bit. Now, after doing these couple of heroics and these couple of Mythic Plus keys, I kind of started to realize something, that the way Death Knight heals is quite literally just press Death Strike. I always thought that it was more complicated, that you had to do some kind of setup, or that you had to very, meticulously calculate what button to press when, but Death Knight heals based on the damage you take. So if you take a big hit, you hit Death Strike and then you're back to full HP. That's pretty much it. It's interesting, but it's also kind of beautiful in its simplicity, and it feels very responsive as well. So that is it feels nice. Playing Death Knight actually kind of feels nice, and I started to notice this throughout the rest of the week, that from all of the tanks that I've tried so far, I connected the best with Death Knight, which is funny because I benched it in the first week because I felt like it was a bit too over my head, especially while also learning the other tanks. But coming back to it properly now, it actually really starts to click, and I really, really thoroughly enjoy it. So I wonder where that goes throughout the rest of this journey. Now, the key that I got from this Ultimate +7 was a +9 freehold. However, I thought I recorded it, but I didn't. So I don't have the run to show you guys. That said, it was a clean run overall. We +2'd it, so it gave me a +11 underrun, which luckily I did record, so we can dive into that one instead. So this key was, simply put, a shit show. The ticks were pulled, the patrol was pulled, we had 2 druids, a mage and a paladin, and none of them bothered with the incorporeal affix throughout the entire run. People died to the frontals on the first boss, nothing got kicked, people didn't seem to realize the Bloodswarmer has a fixate which will kill you, and then on Cragmaw, this happened. Then the mage went offline and the key was officially dead. So, +10 underrun it is. Now the +10 went much better overall, kind of. It was a clean run up until this bit where I pulled a bit too big and some stuns went off on the party, which combined with the fixate of the Bloodswarmer spells disaster. This made it so the pull was dragged on, but we did end up making it. Then on Cragmaw, when the tantrum started, the DPS decided to just zerg on the boss instead of playing the mechanic, which meant we fell behind on ticks, making it way more of a close call than it should have been, but luckily we did end up making it right before being overwhelmed. Then on the last boss, we also had a close call after the healer ended up going down and baiting the frontal wasn't done correctly, but nevertheless, we finished the key, weirdly enough. I was rewarded with a belt upgrade, so worth it, in my opinion. This gave me a +12 Neltharis, and the main event in this key is all the way on the last boss. We had some deaths on Forge Master, so we didn't have any battle reses left. People ended up dying to the swirlies, and our damage slowed to a crawl right before the shield went up. I ended up having to survive an entire shield phase solo to then kill the boss, which honestly felt pretty good. Now at this point, I decided to go all the way and get some score on every dungeon, even if it was a lower key. I simply enjoyed playing the Death Knight so much that I wanted to play it more. So I hopped into a +8 Neltharion Slayer. Now, this first pull is once again kind of a perfect example of tanks not being given the time to get the pull properly together. I wanted to run all the way to the back and pull pretty much the entire first area, but I was not allowed because people immediately started DPSing the first couple of mobs in the pull. So, to all the DPS players out there, here is a trade offer. You give me more time to get the pull together, and I give you bigger DPS numbers because there's more mobs in the pool. And you know what they say, bigger number gooder, right? So there you go. Please accept my proposal. Please, I swear to, please. Thank you. Now, Neltharion's Lair, especially in the lower to mid-level key range, is considered to be one of the easiest dungeons of the dungeon pool, and this was pretty much the case in this run as well, especially if it's just a +8. Now all of the deaths, except for one on the last boss, were due to avalanche shenanigans. At some point, the 3 DPS were dead because of it, because they didn't dodge the circle. Now on the last boss, it is very important that the placement of the crystal wall thingy is proper, because you don't want to move the boss, because every step the boss takes deals pulsing AoE damage, and you also want to make sure that the ad that he spawns is immediately stunned. Now these people did seem to stack together to get the crystals to spawn somewhere, but they did so very far away from me, so nevertheless I still had to move, and the ad was also just walking, and they didn't really hide it into anything most of the time. So last boss fight was a bit scuffed, but nevertheless it's a low-key. Boss was dead very quickly and we +3'd it, so that's really nice. So next up I joined an 11 halls, which is, you know, a reasonably high key for my Death Knight standards, I guess. But we actually did really well. We went quite fast. We had one random death because the paladin got jumped on in one of the beginning pools, but then we just kind of picked up the tempo really well. And then a random thing that I do want to highlight is that during this pool with one of the dragons, the Mistweaver actually used the Ring of Peace to prevent the patrol from being added to the pool, which I think, you know, it is a +11, and I think it would have been fine if they did add to the pool. But as a general line of thinking, I think that's actually very good and very smart of people to do, because you don't want to suddenly be overwhelmed by an unexpected new couple of mobs. So I really like that. I was very impressed. Now 2 of our DPS had kind of an issue with the big AoE blast on the 3rd boss. The paladin said that their dog distracted them. Honestly, I believe them. It's reasonable enough. But these were low impacts. We had 2 battle reses, so it was not actually a big deal at all. Now the very last boss goes into the big intermission phase when he's below 1%, which is kind of frustrating because now we have to do all this extra stuff just to immediately kill him once he resurfaces. Obviously we still have enough time to +3 the key, so it doesn't really matter all too much, but it's still kind of annoying. Now I got rewarded for this key because I got a helmet on the champion track, which I immediately turned into a tier piece, naturally. Now after this I hopped into a +8 Vortex Pinnacle, and there was some scuff on the first boss. The healer jumped through the boss towards the feral druid for some reason, and then the mage got hit by an orb after polymorphing one of the incorporeal ads. Nevertheless, we got through this entire thing ultimately unscathed, kind of, sort of, a bit, kind of. Now the real scuff was on the second boss, where people just started falling down constantly to the point where it was just the feral and myself left, and we killed, I want to say, like 60% of the boss on just our own. The feral kept themselves alive with just constant instant regrowths, and I am a Death Knight, so I should never really die in this kind of a situation. So we did get through it eventually, but at what cost? Now all the scuff is found on boss fights in this run, because the feral druid and the hunter did not stand in the triangle, so they insta-died, and then there was a 3-person fight. For the rest of it, we did end up getting through it without any problem, and then we +2'd the key. Now the next and final key is a 13 Dragonflight Hollow. Now this run, honestly, was probably the smoothest I've had in the entire week, which is funny because it's one of the higher level keys that I've done, but up until the 3rd boss we didn't have any deaths and things were just kind of going smoothly. I also gained a lot more experience with, you know, the bigger kinds of pools, because Dragonflight has a lot of big pools, and it's just a vibe, honestly. Someone got fixated on the 3rd boss and then they died, but aside from that, this run was very clean, and we didn't get any loot, which is sad, but this set us up perfectly for our vault at the end of the week. Speaking of which, that's it. I didn't do any other content on either the monk or the DK for the rest of the week, so the only thing remaining is to check out our vaults and to see how our characters evolved. For my monk, I had 2 vault options: an Althera's trinket on the hero track or a belt on the champion track. Both were really solid item level upgrades, and even though this trinket isn't anything too special, I decided to go with it because the Time Rift trinket I replaced it with didn't really impress me too much. It's also easier to both loot or craft a belt, I felt. My item level after this week is 410, which is a massive leap forwards. The key I got is a +9 freehold. My DK had 3 vault options: a rather unwieldy trinket from Ulduin, shoulders on the hero track, or a weapon on the champion track. Since I had the cheat death trinket and a crafted trinket, as well as a crafted weapon, I choose the shoulders and turn them into tier. The DK now has 2 set, so that's really good. The DK's item level after this week is 414, once again a massive leap forwards. The key I received is a +13 Ulduman, and that brings us to the end of this way longer than expected catch up with the Monk and Death Knight episode. I'm very open to any kinds of suggestions from you guys, so definitely let me know whether or not you'd want me to focus on one tank at a time, for example. If you have any other suggestions in regards to the format, just throw them at me in the comments. If you want to see other kinds of WoW content from me, same thing. I keep an open mind. I'll post an update on the other 3 tanks before the next reset, hopefully before the end of the weekend. And based on your feedback, the format might work differently from next week forwards. Thank you so much for watching. I'm very excited to continue this journey. It's been tons of fun so far. If you enjoyed this, definitely subscribe and give me a like if you want. Now, with all of that said, I'm out. Cheers.